Hello, welcome to Telesur. I'm Carla Gonzalez in Quito, and this is from the South. We begin in the United States. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders has ended his presidential campaign, making Joe Biden the main frontrunner to challenge Donald Trump for the post in November. Sanders broke the news to his staff on Wednesday. The announcement follows Tuesday's primary held in Wisconsin amid stay-at-home orders to curb the spread of the novel coronavirus. The results have not yet been announced.
I wish I could give you better news, but I think you know the truth. And that is that we are now some 300 delegates behind Vice President Biden, and the path toward victory is virtually impossible. So while we are winning the ideological battle, and while we are winning the support of so many young people and working people throughout the country, I have concluded that this battle for the Democratic nomination will not be successful. And so today, I am announcing the suspension of my campaign. Please know that I do not make this decision lightly. In fact, it has been a very difficult and painful decision. Over the past few weeks, Jane and I, in consultation with top staff and many of our prominent supporters, have made an honest assessment of the prospects for victory. If I believed we had a feasible path to the nomination, I would certainly continue the campaign, but it's just not there. I know that there may be some in our movement who disagree with this decision, who would like us to fight on to the last ballot cast at the Democratic Convention. I understand that position. But as I see the crisis gripping the nation, exacerbated by a president unwilling or unable to provide any kind of credible leadership, and the work that needs to be done to protect people in this most desperate hour, I cannot, in good conscience, continue to mount a campaign that cannot win and which would interfere with the important work required of all of us in this difficult hour.
U.S. President Donald Trump has threatened to stop funding the World Health Organization, accusing it of bias towards China and missing the mark on the COVID-19 pandemic. He claimed the UN body's biggest source of funding was the United States, but according to the WHO, Washington provides 14.67% of its funding back in 2019.
They called it wrong. They called it wrong. They missed the call. They could have called it months earlier. They would have known. And they should have known. And they probably did know. So we'll be looking into that very carefully. And we're going to put a hold on money spent to the WHO. We're going to put a very powerful hold on it. And we're going to see. It's a great thing if it works. But when they call every shot wrong, that's no good.
Jamaica's Prime Minister Andrew Holness has announced that the government will be extending the nightly curfew implemented to fight COVID-19 on the island. The measure started on April 1st and was expected to end on April 8th. It prevented the movement of non-essential persons between the hours of 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. The Prime Minister also said that other restrictions currently in place to address the pandemic, including working from home and the closure of all borders, will also be extended. Jamaica has 63 confirmed cases and 3 deaths related to the virus. Antigua and Barbuda has registered its second death from the COVID-19 virus. In a Facebook post, Prime Minister Gaston Brown said the victims had pre-existing conditions. He further called on the public to strictly observe existing protocols, including practicing personal hygiene, social distancing, staying at home, and quarantining as appropriate. Trinidad and Tobago has recorded 107 COVID-19 cases and 8 deaths as the government continues to ramp up efforts to fight the virus. The health minister warned citizens that the pathogen is evolving and asked the public to stay at home.
Who is outside of their homes, not on essential business. You are the pinnacle of a pyramid of infection. You will infect 2 people, then 2 will infect 6, then 6 will infect 10, and then all those 10 persons start up their own pyramid, and you get this explosion in cases. And that is what we are trying to avoid with these stay-home orders.
The government of Venezuela has imposed a curfew in the municipalities of San Antonio de Táchira and Ureña near the border with Colombia. This comes after 3 paramilitaries tried to enter the country, hidden amongst thousands of citizens that are making their way back home.
These people are going back to their home country after being thrown out and abandoned on the streets of Colombia. The pandemic has unmasked the falsehood of the supposed humanitarian aid given to them by President Iván Duque.
Did you have medical attention? Water, food, nothing?
Protocol is followed as they enter the country. They are tested for symptoms of the novel coronavirus and are put under quarantine for 14 days. But even during this global emergency, the attempts to overthrow the government of Nicolás Maduro don't stop.
People in power inside the Colombian government are taking advantage of Venezuela's generosity and are trying to infiltrate paramilitaries, deserters, mercenaries who are coming here to sow violence. We had suspected something like this would happen, and so we are checking everyone's fingerprints at the border and matching them in real time with our citizenship database, and also running them through the police database and Interpol. This led us to the capture of 3 paramilitaries.
One side of the paramilitaries was trained in Riohacha camp, where recently a coup plotting operation was dismantled that had the support of the Colombian authorities and the U.S. government. The plan was to smuggle these firearms into Venezuela to assassinate President Nicolás Maduro and other high-level officials. After the assassination plot was foiled, the government of U.S. President Donald Trump moved forward with a different strategy. Attorney General William Barr, who was previously involved with the 1989 invasion of Panama and helped hide the irregularities of the Iran-Contra scandal, presented baseless accusations against the Venezuelan president and other high-level officials for alleged drug trafficking. As the next step of the strategy, Donald Trump announced the mobilization of the U.S. Southern Command to the Caribbean Sea under the excuse of protecting his people from the drug trade. This came just as the U.S. became the global epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic, with about 400,000 cases and nearly 13,000 deaths.
It's not a secret what we are going through. The bodies are so many that we have to come and assist them.
The White House advisor for the Western Hemisphere did not waste time in revealing Washington's true intentions with this strategy.
This is definitely a take-it-or-leave-it situation. We have seen a series of actions that must make Nicolás Maduro regret not taking the many opportunities he has had over the past 6 or so years. When Venezuela started to feel maximum pressure, he must regret not taking those opportunities to leave, as his situation will not improve.
President Nicolás Maduro has sent a letter to U.S. citizens alerting them about the possible war in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Trump's government has once again activated his institutions to achieve his electoral goals, under falsehoods and under the guise of a fight against drug traffickers. He has ordered the largest deployment of U.S. military forces in the region in the past 30 years. He wants to threaten Venezuela and wants to bring us into a costly and deadly war with no end in sight.
A graphic made by the DEA confirms that 84% of drugs headed for the U.S. depart from Colombia's and Ecuador's coasts, while only 7% come from Venezuela. And paradoxically, in the 5 years since the U.S. installed military bases in Colombia, drug production has increased by 285%.
After this break, the de facto government in Bolivia blocks hundreds from returning home due to the COVID-19. More details after this. joining us. Let's continue with news. In Bolivia, the de facto government has appointed pulmonologist Marcelo Navajas as the new Minister of Health after the resignation of Aníbal Cruz. Cruz resigned on Wednesday after facing criticism over his handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. Bolivia's mortality rate as a result of the virus ranks above the global average of 4.7%. It stands at 6.5%. So far, 210 people have tested positive for the illness, with 15 dead and 2 recovered. Hundreds of Bolivians living in Chile have been blocked from entering the country as borders between both nations have closed amid the COVID-19 pandemic. The migrants were met with repression from Bolivian security forces who denied them access to their homeland on Tuesday. According to preliminary reports, the violence left 1 wounded from each side.
I want to take this opportunity to ask once again that the authorities of Talabacan take action to prevent these types of clashes in Colchanes. In addition, food insecurity affects hundreds of Bolivian citizens since stores are closed. We don't have enough goods. The demand surpasses our capability as a municipality.
Ecuador's top court has convicted former President Rafael Correa on corruption charges and sentenced him to 8 years in prison. Correa was among 20 people, including his vice president Jorge Glass, accused of accepting $8 million in bribes in exchange for public contracts between 2012 and 2016. The court also banned Correa from politics for 25 years. And later, Correa heavily denied the charges, saying the situation is a political witch hunt. Correa has been living in Belgium since 2017, and Ecuadorian authorities are not expected to request his extradition until the case has reached the appeal process.
In the midst of this emergency, they took time to hold illegal and irregular hearings. Everyone knows that the hurry is to take me out in time for the next elections. We shouldn't have any faith in the Ecuadorian justice system, which is totally controlled by the government, by the powers, by the media. On the international stage, we are going to generate everything because this case is a joke. There are no bribes. The main and almost only evidence is a notebook that was clearly forged. But it's an outrage that in this emergency they are using judges, lawyers, journalists to continue with their hateful political plan.
As the coronavirus crisis continues in Ecuador, citizens in Guayaquil say authorities are still failing to pick up the bodies of those who have died in their homes. And officials have announced that around positive for COVID-19. So let's take a look at the situation in the country.
The streets of Guayaquil are the site of numerous heart-wrenching stories, tales of those who have been left to die after the collapse of the city's health system, and whose bodies are abandoned by authorities.
This is my mother's house. We're here because we can no longer stand the smell of the body. Nobody is helping us. Nobody has come to pick up my grandfather's body. I don't know where to go to find help. Where is the government when we need them?
Campesinos in Guayas province have started to organize for the possibility of a food shortage.
Providers are saying they don't want to go to Guayas anymore out of fear of getting infected. That is why the Campesino movement in Guayas has set up special brigades to pick up product that was discarded on the fields because we cannot let anything go to waste now.
Recently, due to political disagreements, the National Assembly blocked the approval of a new health code. For lawmaker Ángel Sin Maleza, one of the main mistakes made by this administration was laying off hundreds of doctors.
The
layoffs started last year, and authorities were warned that this was a mistake, especially getting rid of people in the epidemiology department and those in the research institute. We had asked the previous health minister to talk to the government to put a stop to the layoffs. Now we're all paying for those mistakes.
On the top of this, authorities announced that around 40% of health workers have been infected by COVID-19.
We have over 1,600 cases of health workers who have tested positive for the novel coronavirus. This is worrying because they have to go under quarantine before going back to work.
Authorities have provided citizens with new ways to ask for the removal of the victims' bodies, but people say that these are not working. Guayaquil's City Council announced they would donate over 1,000 cardboard coffins for the deceased.
A shipment of medical aid from China has arrived in Mexico City as part of the government's plan to bring in personal protection equipment for hospitals in Mexico. According to the Deputy Health Secretary Hugo Lopez, the shipment mostly includes hazmat suits, surgical masks, and N95 masks. He also said Mexico is expecting more of this kind of shipments from China. Uruguayan authorities have authorized a humanitarian flight to evacuate 100 passengers of the Greg Mortimer cruise ship. The passengers will be flown back to Australia as the cruise ship has over 128 positive cases of COVID-19.
Over 100 Australian and New Zealand passengers are to be evacuated back to Australia, with the remaining passengers and crew staying on the ship in quarantine. Most of those who will remain on the ship are crew members. The crew are much younger in age than the passengers, so those we will be evacuating are the older people who are more at risk. The crew have an average age of 40 years.
Coming up, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson continues to recover in a hospital due to COVID-19. Stay with us for more. Welcome back. More news at this hour. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has begun a third day in intensive care. Johnson was hospitalized late on Sunday night after his COVID-19 symptoms persisted.
People, I'm sure, will also want an update on the Prime Minister's health. He is receiving excellent care from the NHS team at St Thomas's. The latest from the hospital is that the Prime Minister remains in intensive care, where his condition is improving. I can also tell you that he has been sitting up in bed and engaging positively with the clinical team.
And a new field hospital has opened in London as the United Kingdom registers about 61,000 COVID-19 cases and over 7,000 deaths. The NHS Nightingale Hospital was built in the Excel Convention Centre and is able to house around 4,000 patients. A second NHS hospital, which has been built at the National Exhibition Centre in Birmingham, is to be open on Friday. It would initially have 500 beds with the capacity to expand to 2,000. 16-hour-long talks on a coronavirus economic rescue plan for the Eurozone, worth up to $583 billion, have broken up without a deal. Negotiations were suspended between 19 finance ministers of the Eurozone amid the North-South divisions over the conditions that should be attached to credit issued by the Eurozone Bailout Fund, the European Stability Mechanism. Countries that are hardest hit by the COVID-19 pandemic, such as Italy and Spain, can draw on emergency credit lines and request about $259 billion in loans. However, countries are split over what the terms and conditions of this loan should be. Talks are expected to continue on Thursday. For the second consecutive day, Spain has recorded a steep rise in fatalities due to the novel coronavirus. This number is now up to 757 deaths in 24 hours and brings the total figure to more than 14,000.
The cumulative number of cases as of Tuesday afternoon is 146,690, representing a total of 6,180 new positives. And based on this data, we continue to see a 4% increase in daily figures. As it relates to the death toll, 14,555 people have died in total, with 757 fatalities in 24 hours. Another important statistic to note is that more than 48,000 people have been discharged.
A Romanian medical team has arrived in northern Italy to assist local hospitals in the combat against the COVID-19 pandemic. Although pressure on intensive care wards has somewhat eased in the past few days, Italy remains the hardest hit country in the world, with more than 17,000 deaths reported on Wednesday. The European Commission announced that aside from the Romanian team, a group of doctors will also arrive from Norway to help treat coronavirus patients. Also in Italy, a huge section of a bridge has collapsed in Tuscany, leaving 2 people injured. Given Italy's nationwide coronavirus lockdown, there were only 2 trucks on the bridge over the Magra River in the province of Massa Carrara. One of the drivers was taken to a hospital with minor injuries, and the other driver was able to climb out of his vehicle unharmed, but suffering from a shock. The incident comes as Italy is still working to rebuild a heavily used bridge in Genoa, which collapsed in 2018 during a rainstorm, killing 43 people. And China has ended its lockdown of Wuhan, the city where the coronavirus first emerged. After 11 weeks, authorities will allow the city's 11 million residents to once again travel in and out of Wuhan. However, residents will be required to keep using a smartphone application that monitors their health status and shows that they have not been in recent contact with anyone confirmed to have the virus. Across Wuhan, nearly 94% of businesses have reopened, but schools remain closed for now. Wuhan's international airport has also reopened. Among the first passengers were a group of medical workers who were able to fly home after joining the front line in combating the outbreak in the city. Other passengers also included those who were stuck in Wuhan after visiting their families for the Lunar New Year. As life is slowly returning to the streets of Wuhan, China's National Health Commission has confirmed 62 new cases of COVID-19 and also 137 asymptomatic infections. None of the new cases were reported in Hubei province, the epicenter of the outbreak, and most of them were imported from abroad.
There are 62 newly confirmed cases, of which 59 cases are imported from abroad, 25 cases in Shanxi, 25 cases in Heilongjiang, 5 cases in Shanghai, 2 cases in Guangdong, 1 case in Beijing, and 1 case in Zhejiang. 3 cases are domestic cases, in which 2 cases in Shandong and 1 case in Guangdong. There are 2 new deaths, 1 in Shanghai and 1 in Hubei.
Russia has announced measures to help businesses and people cope with the economic impact of the coronavirus crisis. This includes unemployment benefits equal to the amount of the minimum wage, and the government will also allow small and medium businesses to reschedule their debts.
Everyone who lost their job and applied to the employment service after March 1st, I propose paying unemployment benefits in April, May, and June automatically, and at the highest bracket, which we have already increased, equivalent to the minimum wage of 12,130 rubles.
Iran has urged the International Monetary Fund to approve a $5 billion emergency loan to combat the COVID-19 pandemic.
I urge all international organizations to fulfill their duties during this condition. We are a member of the IMF, a member of the World Bank. We are paying for our membership. A part of our reserves are at their disposal. It will be written down in history that the White House, which was engaged in economic terrorism so far, is now a terrorist in health issues too. This will remain as a historical shame for America's leadership.
And for our last story, authorities in Afghanistan have warned citizens about increased crackdowns to enforce quarantine measures. In the city of Kabul, residents have been advised to stay indoors or face being fined. The capital was put under lockdown on March 28th, but as in other places, many citizens cannot afford to stay at home for extended periods of time. Afghanistan has so far reported just over 400 infections, with nearly 3,000 more suspected cases. And with that, we end our news brief, but you can find these and many other stories by going to our website, telesurenglish.net. For our viewers in Africa, you can find us on Starsat channel 461 in South Africa and 539 in Nigeria. And be sure to also find us on social media. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Until next time.